Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever it may be. Welcome to BIM Thoughts. This is Jim Balding in the place of Bill DeBevick. We're excited to come to you from all over the world. We've got folks in the East Coast, West Coast, North Coast, and Sydney. Live from Sydney, we've got Wesley Benn. Wesley, welcome to the program.
Good morning from me. Thank you very much.
In the tradition of William Slick Willie DeBevick, we'd like to ask you, Wesley Benn, define yourself.
Define myself. I guess I would say I'm an architect, entrepreneur, chocolate lover, dreamer.
And enough said.
I'd like to know what kind of chocolate.
Every kind of chocolate.
I feel like everybody's partial to a type of chocolate.
I'm a non-discriminatory chocolate eater.
Hear, hear.
You know, I do recall an AU once where we had a Reese's peanut butter cup that costs $18.
For one cup.
I think it was 2 pounds of chocolate. It was, holy cow. So yes, I can attest to the chocolate lover.
Yes, and that particular Reese's peanut butter cup did not make it past the end of AU.
No, it was sizable. They were huge. Wesley, a follow-up to Slick Willie's intro question. I wrote down another question for you. I'd like you to tell us something about yourself that most people don't know.
Okay, I've had an interesting and fairly diverse set of careers, perhaps, over the last 30 plus years. But what I would say is perhaps more topical and recent for me is that I've been very actively involved in refugee support and advocacy work, something I've been doing for 10 or 15 years, but even more recently with the situation with the pandemic and the closing of borders and the inward focusing of most governments, the problems that refugees experience has only increased. So work to help with advocacy at government and legislative level, with support in terms of legal resources, access to proper food, clothing, and other base materials. And it's something I feel very passionately about.
Interesting. That's not the direction I thought you would take this, but in my notes for today's show, I wrote down basically expect the unexpected and a bunch of things about change. So that was what I was expecting, I guess.
Yes, well, I have through the years had essentially run through a number of careers. I've been involved in the car racing community as a driver in World Rally Championships. I spent some time prior to doing my architectural degree here in Australia, working as a paralegal, as a lawyer in a law firm here in Australia with no experience, and therefore with a coda in my contract specifying that I wasn't allowed to talk to all of the lawyers who'd actually gone through law school to get their jobs about my contract. You know, I worked as a taxi driver for a little while. I've been a removalist. The only job I ever got fired from was serving frozen yogurt in a little shop at Manly Beach here in Sydney. So I thought at the time maybe I'd been eating too much of the product, but the whole place closed a little while later. So I felt a little bit better about it. But it certainly led me to that experience of many, many different environments and ways of working and ways of thinking, led to me living in multiple countries. And that has informed the way that I think and operate now within the Digital Built Environment Institute, with the things that we're trying to do inside the AECO industry as well. That sense of difference in culture and society and what is considered normal, what is considered reasonable, how we interact, how we speak, all of those pieces of the puzzle.
It's so cool within our community to see what people spend their spare time on. Now, with that being all said, and with, we know that you're very involved within the built community and the national conferences, and let's talk about what the last years look like. It's been such a strange space for us who really rely on those national conferences, not only the learning, but the communication, the relationships involved in these meetings.
Yeah, you guys had to shift gears right in the middle of all this.
Yes.
So you went from having conferences, 4 or 5, however many conferences with hundreds and thousands, or maybe even more than 1,000 people, and to say, wait a minute, we're not doing this. We're going to go virtual, and you had no clue how to do that. You've never done that.
Right.
So to Dana's point, how did you manage that, and what did you learn, and what worked, what didn't? What did you like from that to bring forward, and what did you want to definitely leave behind? So there's 7 questions to answer.
Yeah, there's a whole series there. And interestingly, part of the way in which I need to answer that goes back several years. And that is because in the development of this organization, which really hails originally from about 2003, and our first conference was in 2005 in the mountains outside of Sydney, Australia, we didn't start this process with some grand plan about what the organization could become on a global basis, what impact we might look to have. Instead, it was a very Australian sense of, well, this user group, technology-based group of largely architects using Revit at the time, getting together once a month, thinking that's not good enough, let's go away for the weekend. And in very Australian terms, the KPI was go away for the weekend, geek out and get shit-faced. In other words, drink a lot of alcohol and talk deep thoughts through the middle of the night about technology. And that was our first event, and that was essentially the goal of it. Our very first North American event, our very first international event, was in Huntington Beach in 2011, and Jim was involved in that event, and we had several hundred people there for that one. And the way that we have added events across time has been largely through a pull methodology, through people within particular regions coming to us and saying, we need the support of this kind of community, this kind of face-to-face collaboration that these events represent. Can you look at bringing the event into our region? Now, what's interesting with that having been going now for 15 years is that we can look at what we created and, like anything, statistics, say both that it's been enormously successful and that it's had no impact at all. And both of those things are true. The issue is that the audience to which it has been largely aimed, the people who have been involved, are very much the leading wave in technology terms, the leaders, the thought leaders and innovators that drive change in industry. So it's the very important piece. And within the context of that group, it's been a very successful environment for sharing and expanding knowledge. But it has not extended beyond that to pick up more of broad industry, which is what needs to happen if we're going to affect change at a global level. So over the last 5 years, let's say from 2015-16 onward, we started to look at that and say, to meet our goals of affecting change at a global level related to productivity and efficiencies in our industry, which flows on to impact sustainability on a global basis, climate change on a global basis, we need to be working with all of industry. Therefore, in those years, we started to think about what are the changes that we would need to make in order to affect those changes. And what that meant is that as we ended 2019 and came into 2020 and the pandemic smashed everybody, we already had thoughts and ideas related to changes we would want to make in the organization to increase the connection between people, to increase the communication across industry. And that did mean that as we suddenly had to make the changes that you're talking about, the move from what was purely a physical event-based organization to operating, entirely virtually, we had a number of the ideas and basic plans in place to act on. So in 2020, we went from 2019 with 13 physical events in 7 countries to 2020 with no physical events, but we had 5 different virtual events, and we ran 84 webinars that managed to touch across a broad chunk of industry. At the same time, we also introduced a community platform, which is community.dbei.org, to create a gathering place for all of industry, as well as a center for us to then start to implement some of the new activities that we are hoping to provide to the industry. So we have a program called Built Academy, which works currently with tertiary education and is driven by the students that are within the program. And that group does normally physical events, but there's also a major works project that they can do in collaboration between Built Academy and their university, and a mentorship program that will connect those students with industry leaders that we hope becomes a career-long, lifelong mentorship relationship. We have a forum system that we're just starting to build that has sections in it such as Ask the Expert, because one of our great strengths, of course, already is the number of leaders, teachers, authors, podcasters, YouTubers, etc., that are in this community that are available there to be contacted. We have at this point, nearly 400 strong collection of videos in DBEI TV, our video library, from previous events that we've held, from webinars. We're just starting to add to that access to third-party video sources like B1M and others, so that people, eventually this can become a central place to find material that's of interest to you from across all of the different sources.
So I don't want to interrupt, but
Please.
to sum this up, the question that really is at the forefront of my mind is, moving forward with this, you've experienced the physical events, you've done some great events, just phenomenal events. And now you've experienced a whole year of pandemic and virtual events. What does 2021, 22, 23 look like? What are you taking from your past experiences to what's next year and the years after that look like in terms of your goals?
So one of the things that I think everybody clearly sees at the moment is this deep, somewhat desperate desire of people to re-experience face-to-face environments. So certainly our goal is to get back to holding physical events as soon as is genuinely safe to do so. Now, what that means in 2021 terms is our first physical event is in September of 2021 in Sydney, Australia. And that was an event that was supposed to have been held last year and obviously couldn't.
And that's a built?
And that is a built event. Yes, it is. Our expectation then is that that in fact will be a hybrid event. So there will be streaming of sessions as well. Yes, we are expecting that at that point in the Australian experience of COVID-19, there will not be specific restrictions that we will have to contend with for the scale of event. However, we are expecting that there will be a reduction in the number of people attending, because you have the balance between that desperate desire to get to face, but also companies recovering from their experience of the pandemic, and therefore some limitations on the willingness to spend money to attend events, the willingness to travel. Australia has had a very strict experience of how to handle the pandemic. And as a result, as a country, we're talking, 27 million people, under 10,000 total infections, under 900, or sorry, just around 900 total deaths across this entire period. So we expect that there will be a fair bit of oversight on events. So we're currently thinking that this event will be about half in physical attendance, about half the size that it would otherwise have been, maybe 400 or so people to the built event. We won't have a restriction on the number of people attending into the virtual side of the event. And in terms of access to exhibitors, trade show aspect of the event, again, that will be both physical and virtual. And we have new software systems in place that we believe will give really a wonderful new quality of experience in the virtual environment. Because also, somewhat back to what Jim was asking about, one of the learnings that we go through with this is, first of all, there's webinar fatigue that everybody has experienced. And there is also just the volumes of webinars. They're a dime a dozen, and it's somebody on Zoom just speaking to a screen, and everybody sitting there listening. What are the methods that we can use to increase the sense of connection, the feeling of participation that the attendee has in that experience? And so we've been working on a couple of pieces of that, one of which we have ready that will be used in those environments, a system called On Air. Another which we're working with currently with both Epic Games using their Unreal Engine, and also with Oculus, with looking at the Oculus Quest 2. And we're looking at a system where for a particular virtual event, your ticket to attend the event includes us shipping you a Oculus Quest 2 headset. So you then end up with 500-600 people all in a fully realized, high quality rendered 3D environment for an event. Plus, even in normal circumstances, the travel and accommodation aspect of an event is often at least 50% of the cost of the event itself. So a number of people are unable to attend physical events simply because of the travel aspect. And that was long a part of why the events that we've always run moved around every year, to try and ensure that if you're one of those people who's not able to afford the financial outlay to travel and pay for accommodation for an event, at some point, the event might come to you. And then with the event being here in your space, you kind of have to go because it's been brought to you. But then you get to experience it and hopefully discover that the
then
value
comes the addiction.
Yeah, you get the addiction. That's right. And that the value of the
that you can't not go.
Exactly. And that the value of the attendance justifies the cost. Next year, our second physical event that is likely to come on after our event in September this year here in Sydney is in Valencia in Spain. And I know that there's quite a lot of people, particularly in North America, who would go, ooh, yeah, I'd really love to be there for that. It's a wonderful part of the world.
Hey, on that topic, Wesley, are you willing? Do you have the conference schedule that you want to share with the listeners? And I don't want to put you in a tough spot. I mean, if you don't have anything that you're ready to announce, but
what I can tell you is we have a virtual event that'll be running this year. in June 22nd to 24th. And that will be 3 streams of classes across those days, looking at classes to suit people across multiple regions. So time zones will also be separated to be able to work for people in different regions. We then have our first physical event in 23 months, which will be in September here in Sydney. But then our next event after that, as I mentioned, is in Valencia, Spain. And that won't be until early 2022. Our hope, our goal is to be able to announce physical or hybrid events for North America, Europe, and ANZ for 2022 in the next 2 to 3 months. But we did have to pull back because we had contracts in place for Sydney, as I mentioned, in Valencia. Both of those events are going ahead. For events that we were looking to hold in both San Diego and Denver for 2020 and 2021, both of which have been put off and are now being re-examined. We were also looking at doing a federal focused event in Washington, D.C. At the end of this year, in December this year. But that event we're looking at first week of December of 2022 for that event. Yeah, so we don't have a lot of those dates locked down, but our goal is to see a full resumption of those events in 2022.
Fair enough. Cool.
That leads me to a question. We started with Jim's question a little bit earlier about, what you've learned, the positive and the negative, and you started talking about, the positive. We have that group of people that come to our events. We're all right here in this room. Everyone sort of comes together, which I guess sort of leads to that phenomena of preaching to the choir. Yes. And one of the things that's kind of required to grow the brand and to bring other people in from outside of just us technical BIM heads that we have here is getting people outside of that industry. So what might you have in place for these new events we talked about coming up in 2022 to bring some new blood, as the case may be, into to the environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's probably 3 primary pieces to that. One is that the events that we run, particularly in North America, which has the largest grouping of events, under the umbrella of the Digital Built Week. And what we're looking to do is twofold there. One is to expand the scale and nature of the exhibition we have there, the trade show, to include organizations across a broader swathe of the industry, and to open that to attendance for everybody, not simply for those who've paid to go to an event like Built or the Digital Technology Summit or Building Content Summit, etc. So that you get far more people there, and then you can encourage the interaction between them and conference attendees. The next piece is to add events operating at a broader level of industry, because an event like Built is very much focused on advanced, expert, guru level technologists, thought leaders and innovators in industry. We have a series of classes there whose level is called guru, and our definition of guru is if you don't think you can run this class, you may not even want to attend it. So advanced classes, expert classes, guru classes, but that's only feeding that choir. It's working within the bubble, and we must get outside of that bubble in order to be effective. So we're introducing a national BIM conference that has beginner through intermediate advanced classes. And that will be open to a larger audience and becomes a feeder for people so that there is a way for them to have a progressive track through their career of, well, early on in my career, I'm attending a generalized BIM conference to learn about technology and tool usage in the way that I develop in my career. And then later, as I progress through my career and through the ranks within a company, I start to attend events like DTS or Built or others. And so it gives you a way to move. The third piece of it is increasing the connections to government. So mentioned the fact that we're looking to have a federal event in North America, in Washington, D.C., offset by roughly 6 months from the Digital Built Week, to connect the industry with the players within government who, generally speaking, can't attend events outside the Beltway. So let's bring everybody there. So anybody who's interested in
I love that you know
getting
what the
involved,
Beltway is.
um,
Look at you.
I can actually, if you say you need me to take you to Tyson's Corner to do some shopping from your house, I can probably take you there without GPS.
So what happened in Chicago then?
Schomburg, yeah, come on. My brother used to live in Falls Church.
Okay.
One of my grandparents before that, and I have some family in Old Town Alexandria.
There you go.
My brother's now at the waterfront development downtown.
Nice.
Yeah. So no, I know that part of the world actually quite well. I did an internship there during my university work here in Australia. I did an internship in Fairfax.
Well, I was born in Fairfax Hospital. That's awesome.
And then the question becomes, how do we leverage the necessity of a pivot in the way we interact currently to then serve a broader goal of improvements in the way that we work and collaborate? Human nature makes us very resistant to change. And I think that this industry is even more so in its resistance to change. And the introduction of BIM tools back in the 80s, through ArchiCAD and other tools as things started to happen, cracked open the door, because really CAD tools were simply a replacement of a pencil with an electronic pencil. Whereas BIM tools really are taking us back to the Middle Ages, back to the idea of the master builder, and the broad understanding of something greater than just how to design, but also how to build and how to live, and the need for all of those things. So that door was cracked open. What do we have to do to push that door open further? And in doing so, how can we use those opportunities to then address some of these really major problems we have? When you look at our industry, we represent between 7 and 8% of the global workforce. This is the broad construction industry, so it includes operations of the built environment. It's between 7 and 8%. But we generate 34% of waste in the industry. We generate 31% of airborne pollution, and we make use of 51% of global energy production. So more than half of all the energy produced in the world is used in the built environment. At the same time, sorry.
Well, I was going to interject, as you're putting us in a 7 to 8% of the people that actually build the buildings.
And
what's the percentage of people that actually use the buildings? You need to put that in there as well. And it's probably closer to in society, in our type of society, it's 100%.
Yes,
of people use these products. So
yes.
I hear you. That's why I said in our what we could probably say 80, but still it's a little bit misleading. However, we are the ones that are responsible to make the change that would bring those numbers down.
100%.
And I think that's where you're going with this.
Yeah. Now, I would suggest to you that it is effectively 100%, because when you look at the term built environment, it essentially means any manner in which you have modified the natural environment. So unless you are
living in a cave or under a rock,
running naked through the forest and sleeping wherever you fall over, but as soon as you weave two palm fronds together to keep the rain off of your head while you sleep, you have modified the natural environment. You have created built environment. So really, every single person on this planet is affected by the built environment. And so our goal with the Digital Built Environment Institute, in effect, is to try and have an impact on every single person on the planet. Now, that sounds insane. And goals are what you shoot for. They're not necessarily what you achieve. But if you can put people on a path towards those goals, it's still a worthy endeavor. And the problem with our industry is when you look at productivity change across all industries globally over the last 80 years, since World War II, the construction industry most broadly has only improved by 0.1%. The next worst industry is mining, which is 5 times better than that experienced in construction. And the really interesting thing about that statistic is that all of the improvement in construction actually happened between 1945 and 1965. And that in fact, our industry in the last 60 years has dropped in productivity, including even in the last 20 years where we're talking about all these new technologies and tools that we have. Our productivity has gotten worse.
That's interesting, because that brings me to a question that I wrote, because on April the 5th of this year, Revit will be legal to drink. That's when it was launched. It was launched April 5th, 2000.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, AutoCAD was 18 years old.
Yeah.
Being born in 82.
Yeah.
So is there, or what do you see coming down? Do you see anything coming down the pike that would help us improve this? Is BIM and Revit and all these tools, are those the answers and they just need to mature more? And is that foundation strong enough to do that? Or
And I want to backtrack 1 second before he answers that question. Maybe gives us a final thought, because we could go all day with Wesley and Jim Balding. Let's just be real. But one thing that I thought Wesley said was that really, really inspirational was BIM brought us into building. We're not just drawing lines anymore, right? We actually are understanding more. When somebody comes to me and says, how do I draw this in Revit? I say, how is it built?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right? Like that is the direct response to BIM, is we are actually more comprehensive in terms of how is the contractor dealing with this? How do we deliver not only the contract documents, but this 3-dimensional model that portrays the built environment? But I think getting back to Jim's question, maybe a final thought is, what's the next part of that? Where do we go next?
Right. Is it based on what we've got now, or is there something new?
Okay, let me take that answer in 2 pieces, because I did want to make a comment related to your point about you asking the return question to people, well, how is it built? So I teach at a couple of universities here and in China. And when I'm working with first-year students, I say to them, during your summer break, and you're going to go out and get a job, don't go work in an architect's office. Go work on a building site.
100%.
Because when you're done with your studies, so I can teach you how to use a design tool a lot more easily than I can teach you how things actually get built. And even if you spend your summer simply following a builder around and listening to the nature of the conversations they have and the order in which they deal with things on site, that will hold you in much better stead and will teach you much more than learning a particular tool that eventually that tool is going to be superseded by something else. But the knowledge of how to build and how people live, that is going to hold you in good stead all along. And one of the frustrations I have, even with the way we build, because this starts coming back to Jim's question, is that if you were to resurrect a Roman legionnaire 2,000 years ago, you probably need half an hour to teach him what he needs to know to be just as effective on that site as any other laborer.
As long as we're using metric and the plans are in Italian, he's good.
Yes, that's right. A proper measurement system, yes. Yes. So, and It's an incredible indictment of our industry.
Right.
And we have, not just in our design and documentation systems, but in our construction systems, we have the tools we need to fix this. We have the processes, we have the skill sets and the people necessary to answer a lot of these fundamental problems we have. And a 1% improvement in productivity in our industry as of 2016, so nearly 5 years ago, represents 1.9 trillion US dollars of value added to the global economy. 1%. More importantly to me, if we were to improve our industry by 1%, how many coal-fired power plants do we shut down, given that we use half of the world's energy production, right? And what does that do in climate change terms? All those sorts of questions. So back to Jim's question. Over the last nearly 10 years, I've seen a number of aborted attempts to look at and implement some new technologies that take BIM tools to that next level. I've seen tools that have gone into development, including the ability to interpret a hand sketch into a physical component in an automated way. So if I draw a staircase in plan and a quick section through it, it will actually create that staircase and stick it in the model for me, figure out the materials required to build it, et cetera, et cetera. So with the use of AI tools that we're seeing, computational design, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and with the rapid advance in machine learning, a lot of those tools are on the edge of occurring, but I do see them as an evolution of the track that we've been on with BIM tools over the last 20, 30 years. CAD was an evolution from hand drawing. I considered BIM to be a revolution in methodology because it was a fundamental change in methodology, which CAD was not.
Right.
I think that the next steps that we're going to see in the tools that are just starting to appear at the moment are evolutionary tools related to BIM. And I think that going back to being in the bubble, preaching to the choir, as Carl said, is when you are fully engaged in the idea of BIM being the way we should be working and the value that it adds to our processes, it's easy to look at all the people around you you're talking to who all feel the same way and think, well, everything's great, we're all doing this. The reality is, even at this point, BIM tools probably represent less than 2% of the work that's being carried out across the broad AECO industry. And that is part of the reason why we look at those statistics, from 1965 to now, and we're not seeing change that reflects the use of BIM tools. You look at an environment like the United Kingdom with government mandates, BIM levels 1, 2, now people are into BIM level 3, etc. And the improvements that has shown in productivity in those organizations, which is up around 18%. But it's still not being broadly emphasized and activated through all of industry. So to your question, Jim, I think that the BIM tools we have right now and their evolution are a major part of the answer to this. It is more about their extension throughout the entire life cycle, particularly into facilities management stage. I mean, remember that design represents typically only 5% of the overall cost of a building across its lifetime. Construction represents maybe 15%. The other 80% of the cost of a building is in its operation, from construction to demolition or adaptive reuse, whatever it happens to be. And we're not acting in that space. And so if we're going to affect change, we've got to get these tools working across the life cycle of all projects.
I think that's some good points you got into to bring this plane for a landing, as they say. The first thing that I'll mention to what your answer to Jim's question there about it may not be a new tool that replaces Revit, but it may be little pieces. And even just this year on some of the episodes that we've had here on BIM Thoughts, we've had Mustafa from Data Shapes and from Orchestra on talking about what he does. We had Adam Sheether on from BIM Beats and Automation. And then just last week, we had Hovard on talking about Reop, the architects that code and the list of sucks, things that they do to make Revit better. And everyone sort of complains and they chuckle when they hear, that list of sucks. But we know the product, we know what we can do, we know its limitations, and now we're finding ways to get that niche way to make it better. The devil, I guess, as you say. So I think you're right on point by saying that's how we're moving forward. And I think that this to wrap this up and give a final question, I'm going to reach out to our dear friend Melissa Feaston, who sent me a message and said she wanted to ask Wesley that when it's okay to travel again, where's the first place you're going to go? And that seems like a great place to end up the episode. So, Wesley.
Well, thank you. It is a thought I have had in my head quite a lot. I've actually been stuck in Sydney since the end of February 2020, so 13 months now, which is the longest I've been in Sydney continuously since 1993. So there's two answers to that question. In business terms, I would really, really love to get back into Europe. We have an office in the Netherlands in Delft run by Sylvia Tora, our region manager for Europe. And I'd like to get over there and sit down and work with her in relation to where things are going forward and spend some time in Spain, talking with some of the architects with interesting developments there. And of course, the event that we're looking to hold there in 2022. At a personal level, though, just being able to get away and slow the mind down, take a deep breath, recover from everything we've been experiencing recently, I would go into Southeast Asia, and I would either go to the mountains in places like Cambodia and Laos, or probably most likely go to sit on a beach in the central Philippines. So I think that would be my first choice.
Lovely answers. And let me say, I'd love to get me a resort with a swim up bar.
Yes, indeed.
With that in mind, to just finish up the episode, Wesley, where can people get a hold of you and specifically the DEBI community? I think you mentioned it, but just one more time for everyone.
So the web address for the DBEI community is community.dbei.org, which obviously is then a part of the broader DBEI website, which is just www.dbei.org. People are very welcome to reach out to me there, but also through my email, which is wesley.benn, so wesley.benn, wesley.benn@dbei.org. And I'd be delighted to hear from people. All of these things that we're trying to do with this community and for the broader issues of sustainability and climate change require community involvement and activity. So anybody with any ideas and thoughts and willingness to be involved, we would love to hear from you.
Awesome. And also much thanks to you, Jim, for filling in for Bill today. Any last things you would like to mention where people can get a hold of you and the ANT group before we call it a show?
Well, you mentioned the ANT group. My architect. I should mention that I am an architect now, pretty much full time, and not doing hardly any technology training, research, whatnot. So this is why I was asking some of these specific questions about what's coming up. The ANT group is an architectural firm that uses technology, and I'm Jim Balding, jim.balding@theantgroup.com. And we look forward to a new website for the ANT group here pretty soon. We're refocusing our brand. Other than that, it's the Twitters, as Bill says. I'm not even sure what my Twitter handle is. I think it's jim.balding.
Well, we'll make sure we put a copy of it in the show note. And on that note, thank you, Dana, for sticking out with all the technical issues we had for this version 2 or 3. But you at home won't know the difference thanks to slick editing. And with that, thank you very much, everyone. We'll call it an episode.